Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about the horizontal slice. I will explain what I mean by that. I'm actually going to answer a question from John Flyer 4873 who asks, do you have a particular balance of quest content that you try to reach? Is there a process that goes into determining how long slash complex the main quest is versus how many side quests there are and where they are in your world? Let me just say that I didn't used to have any process for that. It was just feel it as you go. And you can kind of see that in Fallout and Arcanum, where there are big chunks of the world that don't have anything in them. There are clusters of places where there are a lot more quests than other places. Temple, of course, was made off a module, and even then, though, we had trouble with some areas were too dense. Vampires certainly had this. Bloodlines had the problem where when we ran out of time, and you could really see where there were areas that just like the Warrens that were big areas with not much in them. So let me tell you about the horizontal slice. Now, I'd made a video on production stages, and I'll link it below. You may want to watch that, where I talk about all the different stages that a game goes through before you ship it. And these are, in particular, these are stages that usually a publisher asks you for. And in that, I talked about the vertical slice. And let me just sum that up really quickly. A vertical slice is you take one area of your game. It could be a level, a map, it's just some part of it that you can isolate relatively easily. And you complete that area to shippable quality. And what that means is it looks like it could ship. All the art is done. There's no temp texture. There are no temp objects. The creatures are done. There are no temp creatures. They animate. They do their correct attacks. The attacks are balanced against the player. The player has a suite of abilities. Maybe not every ability they could ever get, but they have a suite of abilities that represents what the player might be like when they reach that part of the game. And this is I want to be clear here. That means the vertical slice doesn't mean having everything done. Maybe all your creatures aren't done. Well, those creatures won't appear in the vertical slice. Maybe all the player abilities aren't done. They won't be used in the vertical slice. But there are ways to do that. For example, I said the vertical slice in Outer Worlds, we didn't let you go on your ship. So we didn't because you had to go on the ship to switch companions, we just started you with 2 companions. So we only had to write the dialogue and voice over for 2 companions, because that's right, you had the voiceover in the vertical slice. And then we didn't put any crafting stations in that area. There was one on the ship, but you couldn't get on the ship, so we didn't have to get crafting working. But pretty much everything else was done. And that vertical slice was a really good representation of the game. And when people wanted to see the game and see what the game was like, the publisher wanted to see it, we would show them that vertical slice. It was really successful too, doing that. Well, I wanted to do a horizontal slice for Outer Worlds. And a horizontal slice is when you create all the maps needed for the main quest line, from the very beginning to the end. Now, this is a process that I tried to do back at Carbine, and that failed for a variety of reasons. Mainly because you have to make a lot of those levels gray boxes. I was just having my level designers do it, but the artists wanted to do it. And this is one of the biggest problems I've had with horizontal slice. There are some people that cannot see a gray box level and imagine what it will be like in the game, which I think is part of the reason a lot of publishers ask for a vertical slice. Is it's impossible for them to imagine it where you're going, so you just have to show them this is what it will look like. The horizontal slice is not like that. You have basically created all the maps that from start to finish. Now, these maps, a lot of them aren't finished. You're putting them in so the player can get to the main quest. Some of them are just gray maps that they go through. There may not be buildings, so you just have an NPC standing where a building would go. The cave or dungeon may just be represented by a transition into a big gray area. If you're trying to work out timings, you may set up rooms in the rough configuration they're going to be, but there may not be anything in them. You may just have a simple door, and you put locks in to represent this is what's going to slow them down, but you may not have the lockpick mini game if you're going to have it, or you may not have the rules set up for lockpicking, so they walk up and it says you've lockpick, and then it opens the door, just to show that this is what the player's going to have to go through. Any NPCs you talk to may just be standing there in T poses. They may have dialogue that's just stubbed. So you walk up and they're like, hi. And they're like, hey, do you want to go find the missing Foozle? Yes, I do. I want to go find the missing Foozle. Here's your Foozle quest. And you get it. The reason you do this is, first of all, putting together all those maps in the relative sizes they are and the relative configuration they are with all the NPCs and all the quests gives you a good idea of how much stuff you need to make. Even though it may be written in a design document somewhere, this really instantiates it. And for a lot of people, this is really the place where they suddenly realize, wow, we have a lot of maps to make. We have a lot of art to make. We have a lot of dialogue to write. We have a lot of quests to put together and script. So this is where a lot of people on the team suddenly go, whoa, okay, I'm starting to see how big this is. Now, the reason I do this too, for reasons more like what John Flyer asks, was once you put those maps together, you not only have a good idea of how long the game is, but also what parts of the maps are being used by the main quest. So you may set up an area, an outdoor area, and the player leaves, say, the castle and goes through the area to get to a cave. What about all the other parts of that area? I mean, you didn't want to put the cave right next to the castle, so you had them go through a map for a few minutes for them to get to the cave. But what about all that other stuff? That's where you start to think of things outside the main quests. This is where you realize that you have exploration space, places that you can just support pure exploration, maybe put in some creatures to kill, some loot to find all by itself. You know, you jump around some ruins, and on the top of some pillar is a chest. That's fun. But you can also realize that all this area is available for side quests. And that gives you a good visceral idea of how much space you have to fill up a side quest. Now, in one of my other videos about giving XP, I talk about using the 80-20 rule, which for me was 80% of the XP you're going to give should come from the main quests, and the other 20% from the side quests. So if you make this horizontal slice, this gives you a good idea. Since you know how much space you're taking up at the main quests, you're like, okay, that's 80%. I need to fill 20% up with side quests. Now, that won't fill all that area because you don't want everything just jammed next to each other. But that also tells you, well, here's some extra space to make pure exploration. This is where you can tell your artist, it'd be fun to have some ruins here. Nothing happens. Or maybe you could put an event that happens, but usually nothing's happening there. Or this is a really cool spooky forest to go through, and we're going to put some of these creatures here. You know, they have to fight to get through it. But again, there's no side quests there. That's where this stuff comes from. Now, the 80-20 rule is just a guideline. You may want to use a different percentage. You may want to go 90-10. 90% of your XP comes from main quests and the other 10% is side quests. Or you may want to go 60-40 or 50-50. Just remember that for me, the rule is the player can do the main quests and only the main quests and still finish the game, which means they don't have to do any of the side quests, which means the main quest should give you enough XP to reach a level of power so the player can finish the game. Maybe they're not at level cap. In fact, they probably shouldn't be at level cap, and that gives the side quests a reason to let the player keep doing side quests and getting more power and better items and stuff. So the ending is even easier for them to do. And this is especially true when you're trying to balance all the different character builds. Some of the player builds are a lot harder to play. So they're not going to be able to finish at a level that an easier player build could. So maybe you make a character that's not that combat oriented, but you've done some things that mean you don't really have a talk solution for the villain at the end. So you're going to have to fight him. So you're going to have to go up a few levels so you can, get better items or get your companions in a better state to help fight. So this is what the horizontal slice lets you get a good visual and visceral feel for how big your game is outside of that main story quest. And this is where you can start adjusting. If you do the main story quest and find out you're using up 90% of your space and you don't really have time to make more maps, guess what? You're probably going to have 90% of your quest XP come from main story quests. But if you have these maps and you're only using half the space for your main quests, then you could easily fill up half the remaining space with side quests and the rest just be exploration. So now you still have, it would be like 75% is main quest, 25% is side quest, and then the rest is just fun places for the player to explore when they're not doing any quests. So this is in general, that horizontal slice is something that I started at Carbine on WildStar, refined in the intermediate stages, and then finally did for realsies on the Outer Worlds, and I thought it worked really well. So that's how I figure out, to answer John Flyer's questions, how long the main story quest should be, and where the side, how many side quests there are, and where they're located. So I hope that answers that question, and I hope this gives you a good insight into yet another one of the stages that video game production goes through.